He shouldn't have opened his eyes. Adrian knew that. But he couldn't stop himself. She was right there. He had to do it. He had to know who she was. And in front of him in the shipping container was Marinette Dupencheng. Adrian just stood there, his jaw slack for a moment in disbelief, before he smiled. Of course it was her. Why hadn't he thought it was her sooner? She was one of the only people Adrian knew who hadn't been akumatized apart from himself, and like him too, he had seen Marinette sneaking away one too many times when an Akuma villain appeared, and she was so kind too, just like Ladybug. It was probably why she had been given the Miraculous in the first place, because of her sweet nature, although Marinette could be quite different to Ladybug. She was a lot shyer, but the more Adrian thought about it, she only seemed to be shy around him. The day Milan had been akumatized, and when Juleka had been akumatized too, Marinette had taken charge. And he had been stupid not to see the Ladybug qualities in her before. So why would she be so shy around him? She had told him after Penny had been akumatized, and footage of her bedroom walls plastered with photos of him had been broadcast to the whole country, that they were just for inspiration since he was a model. But with all of her stuttering and blushing, and the way she let him dance with her the day Chloe's butler had been akumatized, and team with the pictures, he was sure that wasn't true. She had feelings for him. That's why Marinette was so awkward around him, not because she still hated him for putting gum on her chair that first day of school, because she was in love with him. And he was in love with her too. And now he just felt like an idiot for ignoring Marinette when the girl he was in love with was sat behind him in class all along. His smile got even wider, and he wanted to reach out to her, take one of her hands in his, but he caught sight of Marinette's kwami then. It was red with a black spot on her head, and she did not look happy. He quickly closed his eyes, as if that could reverse what he had done, and listened as Plag and the other kwami ate something. Adrian knew he shouldn't have opened his eyes, but he couldn't help it. He had to know, although it was all he could think about for the rest of the fight with the akumatized Mr. Damocles. Adrian tried to forget about it, but he couldn't. Marinette was his Ladybug, through and through. Marinette's Ladybug. Threw the Lucky Charm into the air, the pink ladybugs flying all around them. Then she turned to him with a smile. That was a close one, she said. All Cat Noir could do at this point was smile back, too afraid to talk in case he blurted out his secret. Are you okay, Kitty? Of course. It's just getting late, and I, have homework to do? She smiled. Me too, actually. Pound it, she asked, holding up her fist. Pound it. I'll see you later, my lady. He gave her a wink, trying to pretend like nothing had changed. Then he took out his baton and jumped out of Mr. Damocles' office window. He launched himself over a few houses, then up the garden wall and into his bedroom, just as his ring gave a final beep. Plag hovered in front of him, looking tired, but also amused. I think that may have been the worst idea you've had so far, kid. Adrian smiled as he made his way over to his sofa and sat down. I know, I just had to know who she is. And now Tiki will kill us both. Tiki? That's the name of Ladybug's kwami? Plag nodded. And she's bloodthirsty. That's her favourite food. Blood. That's what Marinette gave us to eat to recharge. Ice cubes of frozen blood. Adrian raised an eyebrow. I think that could be a lie. Well, you'll never know because you had your eyes closed, which is what you were supposed to be doing in the first place. The blonde model rolled his eyes. What's the big deal? Marinette doesn't know, and this way we can meet up without having to transform, which will make us less of a target for Hawkmoth. Hawkmoth is the reason why our identities were supposed to remain a secret, Plag said as he rummaged through his camembert cabinets. If one of you gets akumatized, you won't be able to stop yourselves from betraying the other. This was a bad idea, kid. I agree. Adrian turned to the window, where now an angry red dot was. Oh, hi. Shouldn't you be with Marinette? Tiki glared at Adrian. I told her I had to talk to Plag, because I don't like betraying Ladybug's trust. Adrian flushed in embarrassment. I didn't open my eyes to hurt her. I had to know who the girl I love is. Tiki just glared at him. Except you don't love her. Yes, I do. No, you love Ladybug. Marinette doesn't act the same way. She does. Tiki kept glaring at him. No, she doesn't, and you know she doesn't. You're just trying to tell yourself that. You don't act the same way as Cat Noir when you're Adrian. Pretending you love her just because you know she's Ladybug will just hurt her when she knows what you've done. Adrian held out his hand. Come here, Tiki. The kwami came over and sat herself down, and Adrian brought her close to his face. Hurting Marinette is the last thing I'd ever want to do. I know that, and I know you're a good person, Adrian. But when she finds out what you've done, she'll think you only love her because she's Ladybug. But to me, now I know, I see the Ladybug in her. She has the confidence and leadership qualities that I admire in her. Sure, it's at like a 20% intensity instead of 100, but it's still there, and she's so kind and caring and wonderful. I was stupid for not seeing it sooner. She's my lady. Tiki's glare softened. Just before you say anything to her, whether as Adrien or Cat Noir, please take some time to think about it. Decide if you're truly in love with Marinette or not. Adrien nodded in agreement. He hadn't planned on acting straight away. Plagg was right about why their identities were secret. It was probably best not to say anything for now about what he knew until the situation with Hawkmoth had improved. But that didn't mean he wasn't looking forward to going to school tomorrow now that he knew who his lady was. Just the thought of seeing Marinette again made his heartbeat speed up. It was the same way he felt the first day he'd seen Ladybug. She was so incredible, and so was Marinette. But Tiki was right. There was a chance he was projecting what he felt for Ladybug onto Marinette. She really did act quite differently most of the time. But Adrien had heard Marinette interact with her friends. She wasn't as shy, and she was more confident and assertive with them. But he couldn't help but smile as he realised Marinette was probably shy around him because of how she felt about him. I do have one question though, Adrien said, still holding Tiki. Marinette is in love with me, right? Tiki nodded, a little giggle escaping her mouth. I mean, I thought it was obvious. The whole school knows. Really? Yes. Although, Tiki frowned. Marinette doesn't have any feelings for Cat Noir. Adrien gave the kwami a tight smile. He already knew that, but he tried not to let it hurt his feelings. Marinette was in love with him, and he was happy she was loyal to her feelings for him, despite his alter ego flirting with her non-stop. Not that she knew it was him, of course. I understand. I don't want either of you to get hurt, Tiki said. I won't let that happen, I promise. The kwami smiled. Good. I have to get back. I told Marinette I wouldn't be long. Bye, Sugar Cube, Plagg chimed, mouthful of cheese. I told you not to call me that, Tiki said, back to glaring again. Whatever you say, Sugar Cube. Tiki huffed before she zipped out of the window, and Adrien turned to Plagg, one of his eyebrows raised. You call her Sugar Cube? And? Are you and Tiki? Plagg narrowed his eyes. Kwamis can't fall in love. Incorrect, you love cheese. Plagg puffed out his tiny chest. What I feel for cheese is stronger than love, so if you don't mind, I will go and enjoy my camembert in peace in the bathroom. Adrien chuckled as Plagg phased through the bathroom door, camembert in tow. Then the model turned to face the window. From here, he could see Dupont, as well as the other houses surrounding Place des Vosges, but he couldn't see Marinette's house from here. All this time, she had been so close to him. He stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was setting, and it was making the clouds look like they were made out of orange candy floss. Adrien imagined Marinette was stood out on her balcony, taking in the view, talking to Tiki, or maybe thinking about him. He smiled to himself. It was a little arrogant of him to hope he was on her mind, but he couldn't help himself now, knowing she was Ladybug. Tiki was definitely right. He needed some time to consider if he was truly in love with Marinette, or if he just thought he was because he knew she was Ladybug. Already, at the thought of seeing Marinette tomorrow in class, Adrien could feel his heartbeat speed up, but again, he was unsure whether it was because he had feelings for her, or because he knew she was Ladybug. Part of him wanted to say yes, he really did have feelings for Marinette. She was intelligent and creative and brave and kind and loyal and trustworthy, and if Ladybug weren't around, Adrien was sure he would have fallen for her first. But that statement alone made it seem like she was just a backup plan, like a second choice. He had to be sure before he acted. Despite that, Adrien already knew he cared a lot about Marinette, even before today. She was one of the only people he could truly be honest with, one of the few people he could be himself with. And that self was halfway between who he was as Adrien and who he was as Cat Noir. He loved when Marinette was able to talk to him without being a blushing and stuttering mess, although that was very cute. It was no wonder he frequently visited her as his alter ego when he felt sad, or didn't feel sad and fancied some company. So, if he was only himself around certain people, the same was probably true for her. He just had to make her feel comfortable around him so she would act like herself. Although he wasn't really sure how to do that. Maybe he should just talk to her more, make her more used to being around him. God, she'd die of embarrassment when she found out who she'd been fighting akumas with all this time. From out of his pocket, Adrien took out the charm Marinette had given him. Even before Tiki had confirmed to him her wearer had feelings for him, it had been obvious she cared about him a lot too. This charm had meant so much to him when she had given it to him. It had been a gift from one of his first ever friends, and he kept it on him, always. And now it meant so much more. His princess, his lady, they were the same person. It would be easy for Adrian to get overwhelmed when he was with her now, transformed or otherwise, and it would be easy to blurt out what he knew, but he had to keep this a secret. Adrian shouldn't have opened his eyes, but he was happy he did. Adrian's foot tapped in time to his pen. Marinette was late, because of course she was late the day after he found out she was Ladybug. That was definitely one difference. Ladybug was never late. Was that it for their differences though? The more he thought about it, the more he realised there were really no differences between them. It was more about which traits were more dominant depending on who she was around. He really was an idiot to not have seen Marinette was Ladybug before, but now he was thinking in differences. He was so unlike Cat Noir in comparison to Marinette and her Ladybug persona. Sure, he was nice as both, but he was ultra polite as Adrian and cheeky as Cat Noir. Maybe it was him who should change slightly. He never felt truly comfortable with the image his father had curated for him. He didn't feel like himself. He wanted to be free to act how he wanted to, and maybe that way Marinette would feel more comfortable around him. She had never seemed so anxious around Cat Noir. Miss Bustier came into the classroom then, her usual smile in place. "Good morning, everyone." Various people murmured hello back, and their teacher glanced over her students. "No Marinette?" "I'm here," came a shout from the doorway, and when Adrian looked over, he couldn't help but smile. She was here, his lady. He immediately imagined her as Ladybug, and his heartbeat picked up without hesitation, but Adrian shook his head slightly. He had to see Marinette for Marinette, not as Ladybug. He knew they were the same person, but from what Tiki has said, it seemed like Marinette viewed herself and Ladybug as two different entities, and he was probably going to have to do the same. This was going to be harder than Adrian had initially thought. "Take a seat, Marinette," Miss Bustier said. She nodded and hurried towards it, and ended up tripping over the first step. Lila immediately started laughing, Chloe and Alia joining in. Adrian ignored them and got out of his seat immediately and started to help her up. He held out his hand and she took it, then he pulled her. "Are you okay?" he asked with a smile. Marinette nodded, a light pink blush rising to her cheeks. "Yes." Lila tutted from her seat at the back. "You don't need to help her, Adrian. I'm sure Marinette's used to falling over by now." Alia laughed, Rose, Alex and Milan joining in this time, along with Kim and Max. Adrian stayed silent though, as he watched Marinette's facial expression change. The tiny smile that had been on her face quickly left, and Marinette pulled her hand out of Adrian's. "Thanks." He wanted to really make sure she was okay, to check she hadn't hurt herself when she'd fallen over, and that her supposed friends laughing at her hadn't made her too sad. But the whole class were watching them. It would have to wait. He sat back down, barely focusing as Miss Bustier went over the announcements for that day. He knew Marinette could handle herself. Her many outings as Ladybug proved that. He knew she would be fine. But he couldn't help but want to protect her. There was so much pressure on her in comparison to him. He knew they were a team, equals, but she was still in charge. And with the lucky charm, it really was up to her to decide how they were going to save the day. He just did whatever she told him to. It made being Cat Noir so easy, and it was always fun to him. But there was so much pressure on him at home, with modelling and mandarin and piano and fencing, but whenever he transformed, he felt so free, and everything seemed easier. But with Marinette, she'd had a normal life, and she had to keep that up while also saving Paris every day. He couldn't imagine the amount of pressure on her. Regardless of how he felt about Marinette, or about Ladybug, or whoever, he knew she needed supporting. He'd try harder as Cat Noir during fights and patrolling, and at school, he'd find a way to protect her from Lila. But how? He didn't know. "Alright, that's everything. Time for your science class. Double chemistry, right?" Nino groaned. "I hate this." "You'll be fine," Adrian said. Everyone grabbed their bags and they went downstairs and into the science classroom, Miss Mendeleev watching them with narrowed eyes as they all filed in. "We're doing the experiment we wrote about in the last lesson," she said. "Get into pairs." "Miss, Nathaniel isn't here," Lila said. "Then work with someone else." Lila flashed a smile at Alia. "Want to do the experiment with me?" Without any thought for Marinette, Alia grabbed her things and moved to sit at the back with Lila. Adrian watched as Marinette's facial expression dropped. She hadn't been smiling sat at her desk, her face had just been neutral, but any energy that had been in her face just suddenly drained away. She got her things too and stood up, and before Adrian knew what he was doing, he was on his feet as well. "You can work with me, Marinette," he said, and she stared at him, eyes wide in bewilderment. "What about Nino?" she asked. "Yeah, what about me, dude?" Nino asked. "He's going to work with Ivan," Adrian said, still looking at Marinette. He gave her a smile and then Nino huffed, vacating his seat and going to the back of the room. Marinette came around to the front desk and they both sat down. The last time they had been this close had been in that shipping container yesterday, when he found out she was Ladybug. Adrian's heart immediately skipped a beat and he hoped he wasn't blushing. "You didn't have to work with me," she said, pointedly not looking at him. "I didn't mind working with Ivan." Adrian shrugged. "I know. You just look sad." "I do?" she asked, looking up at him then. He nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. He narrowed his eyes. "Why are you apologising for being sad?" "Because I have no real reason to be. I mean, I'd be sad too, if someone was bullying me and my best friend was laughing about it." Marinette shrugged. "It's not Alia's fault. I don't understand how we're the only two people who don't believe Lila, the only ones who see her for who she really is." Adrian tried his best to suppress his smile. This was a Ladybug coming out of Marinette. "I guess she's just really good at manipulating people. But why not us? We must be immune." Marinette gave him a tiny smile. "I guess we must be. But you're okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, her smile widening. "Good. You know, if it gets too much for stuff about Lila, you can always come and talk to me." "Thank you, Adrian." This was probably the longest conversation they'd ever had. And when she finally managed to stop stuttering, the way she spoke was just like Ladybug. He really was stupid for not seeing it sooner. "But seriously, it's almost like Lila is bullying you at this point. And what can I do about it? If I tell a teacher, she'll just spin it back on me. I can't win." She blushed a little then. "I suppose I'll just have to talk to you about it." "I suppose you will. You have my number, right?" "Yeah." "Then call me whenever." Marinette tapped her pen on the desk. "Well, what if you're in Chinese class? Then I'll give you advice in fluent Mandarin." Marinette's smile got even brighter. "Come to think of it," Adrian said, continuing, "I don't think I know how to say cheer up before you get akumatized in Mandarin. I guess they don't need to know the verb to get akumatized in China." Finally, Marinette laughed, and Adrian couldn't help but smile. It was more genuine than when he heard Ladybug laugh. He knew she only laughed at his puns to make him happy, but her actually finding him funny made him so much happier. "Adrian, Marinette, why haven't you started the experiment?" Miss Mendeleev shouted from her desk. "Sorry, miss," they both said. Adrian started connecting up the Bunsen burner, and Marinette went to the front to get 2 pairs of safety goggles for them, and he couldn't help but smile. He and Marinette had just had a full conversation, which kind of ended up with them flirting by the end. He couldn't believe he'd just done that. Sure, he flirted with Ladybug all the time, but she never flirted back, and because they both wore masks and had secret identities, he had never felt nervous about it. But now he knew who she was, the idea of flirting with Marinette had made him anxious. But as soon as he started talking to her, it just felt so normal, so natural, and he couldn't believe she had flirted back. But they were alone at the front of the class together, and he didn't open the conversation with flirting. Maybe that had made her more comfortable. She came back to the desk and handed him a pair of goggles. "Here you go. Thanks." "Are you any good at chemistry?" she asked. "I guess. I prefer physics." Marinette pulled a face. Said no one ever. "I'll have you know I am great at physics, but it means I can't wear black socks. I'm afraid they'll get black holes." Marinette rolled her eyes. Very funny. Okay, that was definitely a Ladybug-like reaction. "You didn't like my pun?" Adrian asked. "I did, but we're in chemistry class, not physics. I do make chemistry puns, but only periodically." She laughed at that, and Adrian couldn't help but smile again. "Okay, let's be serious now. It's an experiment. I don't want either of us dying." "Oh, dark humour now. I didn't know you were so funny," aggressed. "There's more where that came from, Du Pencheng." They set aside their flirting to do the experiment, but for the rest of the class, Marinette did seem a lot brighter. He had definitely managed to cheer her up, and even though he said he would only be a call away, Adrian didn't know if that would be enough to stop her from getting akumatized. If anyone in this city needed not to get akumatized, then Marinette was at the top of that list. Everyone finished their experiments and packed their things away, and Adrian started walking with the rest of the class up to the cafeteria. He'd usually go home for lunch, but his father was away on business and he needed Natalie to go with him, so Adrian had been able to stay at school for once. "Enjoy yourself?" Nino asked, standing beside Adrian as they queued up for food. "What's he talking about?" "Abandoning me in chemistry class to flirt with Marinette." Adrian froze. "We weren't flirting. Dude, the whole room could hear her giggling at your jokes." Nino paused. "I didn't know you knew any jokes." Adrian bowed his head. He had been splitting his personality in half for so long that it was easy to be sensible and nice Adrian at school, and funny and cheeky cat noir when he was with Ladybug. That chemistry lesson with Marinette was the first time he had truly been himself in such a public setting. He couldn't even be like that around Nino. Well, it's alright, you don't need to explain yourself. You both look pretty happy to me. Adrian smiled. He was worried Nina would berate him for making jokes. His father definitely would. But Nina wasn't his father. Once he had got some food, Adrian walked with his tray to where all the tables were. He had never been in here before, but each of the tables had 6 chairs at them. Ivan, Nino, Max and Kim were sat at one, and Lila, Alia, Milen, Alex, Rose and Julika were sat at another one next to them, and Marinette was stood by their table. I'll just put my tray down here and grab another chair, she said. Lila shook her head. No offence, Marinette, but I don't think that's a good idea. Marinette frowned. Why? It's not busy in here. It's not like I'd be taking a seat from someone else. I don't think it's a good idea, Alia said. Marinette looked even more hurt now her best friend had said the same thing. I see. Adrian went over immediately. You can sit with me, Marinette, he said, although he looked at Lila as he said it, glaring at her slightly. Are you sure? Lila asked, her smile tight. I'm sure. Come on, Marinette. He led her to one of the tables at the back of the cafeteria, far from where the rest of their class was sitting, and they both sat down. You didn't have to do that, Marinette said. Yes, I did. I'm not having Lila, or any of the others, treat you like that. I know I'm not normally here at lunch, but is it usually like this? Marinette shook her head and poked at her food with her fork. No, Lila isn't always here, but when she is... Marinette paused in moving the peas around her plate. Yes, but it's fine, she said, gone sad and quiet and subdued again. Hey, he said, putting his hand on hers, and she looked up at him. It's going to be okay. They'll see one day what she's like. And what am I supposed to do until then, she asked, tears shining in her bluebell eyes. Adrian felt himself getting angry, but not at Marinette, for how everyone else was treating her, but they both needed to calm down or the result wouldn't be good. I told you, I'll be here for you, okay? No matter what. Come and find me at school, or text me, or call me, or whatever. We'll get through this together. He squeezed her hand and she sniffed. I'm sorry for getting upset. You don't need to apologise. We just can't have you getting akumatized. She nodded with a smile. Yeah. Let me just go and splash some water on my face. I'll be back in a minute. He let go of Marinette's hand and she left the table. He turned to watch her go and ended up making eye contact with Lila. She was glaring at him. Adrian didn't glare back, but he held her gaze. It was clear that where Lila was concerned, the only one there for Marinette was him, and while it was awful he was the only one who believed her, he had no problems in protecting her in and out of costume. He couldn't let her get akumatized. It would mean Hawkmoth would get her Miraculous, and then she would no longer get to be Ladybug. The thought of the superheroine made Adrian's heartbeat speed up, which, for the first time, made him feel sad. It was clear he didn't really have feelings for Marinette, but it was no surprise. Today had been the first time she had truly been herself around him, and if Adrian was being honest with himself, it was the first time he had truly been himself in front of her too. But that wasn't to say he couldn't see himself falling in love with her. He understood all too well how wearing a mask made it easier to pretend to be someone you weren't, even though neither his or Marinette's superhero personas were that far from their true selves. He already loved her confidence, and he thought she was adorable when she got shy. She was kind and intelligent and brave, and despite talking about Lila twice today, she didn't have a bad thing to say about her. He looked away from Lila as he found himself smiling, now thinking about Marinette, not Ladybug. Maybe falling for her wouldn't be so difficult after all.